paint any dark leather straps, or in this case, the wood of the torture rack, you're going to need 4 colors: AK Black, Scale 75's Black Leather, Red Leather, and Bering Blue. So to paint the wood grain on Krulghast, I guess his rack, or whatever you want to call this, the half crucifix that goes on his back, rather than go with a more traditional wood grain tone, something that I like to do is sort of reuse certain colors or certain color combinations to keep a limited palette across my army and to avoid introducing too many colors. One of the things too is because it does sit on his back, and because the robes are like a brown flesh tone, I wanted to have something that was a little more on the blue side and that would contrast very well. And so I used the color recipe that I paint a lot of the leather cowls and straps on my army with, and I'm going to do the same thing for the wood grain on this model. So you can see on some of my other models I have these leather straps and cowlings. I paint in this reddish blue tone. I'm going to use on the wood of the rack. And so the 4 colors that we're going to be using, technically 3, but we'll introduce the 4th when we get into our airbrush nuancing. It's going to be AK Black, Scale 75's Black Leather, Red Leather, and Bering Blue. What we're going to do is we're just going to keep it very, very simple. We're going to do, because it is a wood texture, we're going to paint stripes with the black leather. We're then going to highlight some of those with the red leather, and then we're going to highlight some of those with a 50-50 mix of the red leather and Bering Blue. Now, you can play around with this ratio, go a little maybe brighter on some of the edge, like the sharp edges of the wood with this, or maybe darker depending on maybe if you have like some bright, dark, bright, so that when you get them side by side, you'll have some darker tones besides some brighter tones. Just by mixing it up, applying a thinner dilution, like a glaze of paint, you can create a lot of variety in the tone. So we'll do those 3. I'm going to show it to you on one of the panels. I'm not going to bother recording the entire thing. Off camera, I'll paint the entire thing, and then we'll come back and do our airbrush nuancing. We're going to start with our black leather, and then we're just going to paint a bunch of lines following the pattern somewhat of the actual sculpt. They haven't defined any wood grain pattern in the actual model itself, but there are some dips and undulations that help you to play around with, I guess, the shape. And then there are some sculpted cracks, particularly near the edges and near the base, that can help inform where you want to put these stripes. Once we've got the black leather down, we're going to switch to our red leather. And what you want to do as you progress through these highlights is to get thinner and thinner. Be a little random, be a little playful. You don't need to be super accurate in painting this. What you want to give is the illusion of the wood grain. And how long you spend is up to you. This is a tabletop model for me, so from 3 or 4 feet away, if it looks like wood grain, I'm happy with it. Once we've got the red leather highlights down, we're going to then take our 50-50 mix of Bering Blue and red leather. We're going to work with a bit more of a diluted mix. And we're just going to pick out some of these more bright highlights. Now, if you're painting the entire piece of wood like this, you want to make sure that you carry your highlights on from the piece above it. That continuity will sell the idea that this is one solid piece of wood. And then I'm getting darker near the bottom, just to match the shadowing on the figure. The rack's going to sit like this, and so it's going to be brighter on the top, near the top of the Y, and darker near the bottom. So on these top panels, I'm going to go heavier into the Bering Blue for the highlights. On the bottom, not so much. And that's all we're going to be doing for our highlighting. So off camera, I'm just going to paint the rest of this rack because it's going to be basically the same thing. And I don't think you want to watch me paint lines for 30 or 45 minutes. So I'll paint this off camera and then we'll come back and do our airbrushing nuancing. Now that we've painted all of the stripes on the wood panels of the torture rack, I want to do a light airbrush glaze using a 50-50 mix of black and the black leather, just to create a uniformity in the shadows and to darken some of the areas. So to do this, we're going to be using our airbrush, using an 8 or 9 parts water to 1 part paint mix. The compressor will be set to about 15 psi, which is 1.5 bar. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just push down to spray air, pull back for a bit of water and color, and then dry it out. And that's just the motion that we're going to be doing to just lightly build up the color over time. And that's the wood fully painted. Nice, quick, simple recipe. Nothing too fancy. You can see that after the airbrush nuancing phase, there's a much smoother gradient into the shadow over here. And I've deliberately kept the underside not quite as refined and much darker, just because it is going to be in shadow, sitting at an angle. I have picked up some of the more brighter spots on the upper part of the Y because that's going to be on top of the model, much more visible. And then to help maintain the volume and the form of the rectangle, I haven't highlighted the sides quite as bright. I've gone up to the red leather with just a touch of the Bering Blue, but I've maintained the edges as the brightest points, with the exception of the top panels, which I have gone fairly bright to maintain that highlighted plane.